Like always, social media is up in arms about this new study. Today we're talking all about, can a lifestyle intervention decrease Alzheimer's risk? Let's get started. And thanks for stopping by, everybody. I appreciate it. For those who don't know me, my name is Jordan Rennicke. I'm a dual board certified physician in family and sports medicine. And the goal of this podcast is to help keep you active and healthy for life through actionable evidence-informed education. Thanks so much for stopping by. I really appreciate it. Today we're talking all about this lifestyle intervention study. So let's dive into it. So first things first, this is the title here. You can see the title. It's looking at intensive lifestyle changes and progression of mild cognitive impairment. And what's really important is that lifestyle changes may affect Alzheimer's. There's numerous lifestyle factors that have been associated with Alzheimer's disease, like poor diet, sedentary behavior, emotional stress, social isolation, lots of different things. And there's a previous Lancet study that mentioned modifiable risk factors could account for up to 40% of the global burden of dementia. And so we're thinking there may be some preventative role inside a lifestyle and dementia. So that's what we're thinking about. Things like hypertension, smoking, depression, type 2 diabetes, obesity, physical activity, social isolation, to name a few, are things that we know can, if we improve those, can improve our chances of not developing a mild cognitive impairment or dementia. And so the goal here of this study was to see whether lifestyle changes may be beneficial to those with mild cognitive impairment or earlier dementia. And essentially the hypothesis was that a multimodal lifestyle change may help reverse the progression of MCI or mild cognitive impairment or earlier dementia due to Alzheimer's. And that's essentially what we're looking for here. Moving on to the methods here. This was a randomized controlled trial for 20 weeks. So 20 weeks, decent amount of time. There were two main groups here. There's an intervention and a control. As in any randomized controlled trial, you need to have one that's getting the intervention, one that is controlled. And this was a pretty intensive lifestyle intervention. Just to go through it, they had a whole food, plant-based diet that was low in fat, refined carbohydrates, and sweeteners with various supplements as well. They included moderate exercise. They included stress management techniques as well, and then support groups as well for kind of making sure that they're sticking to things. And continuing with this, in terms of methods, the ages were about 45 to 90, so 45 years old. They either had to have a current diagnosis of MCI or mild cognitive impairment or early dementia with a MoCA greater than 18. And MoCA, just to step back for 1 second, the MoCA, that's the Montreal, essentially, cognitive assessment. It is a really validated and pretty widespread assessment that people use looking at Alzheimer's or dementia. Essentially, it's a sheet they give someone and run through them, and they follow instructions. It talks about multiple domains in terms of short-term recall, long-term recall, ability to draw clocks, recognize things, make connections. So it's really testing your overall cognition. And MoCA greater than 18 was what was required here. And if you're less than 18, you got some pretty significant dementia. And so I wouldn't say it's mild cognitive at that point. It's definitely dementia. And so, that's why they're going above 18 for that. And people also had to be willing to do this entire lifestyle intervention, right? So that's just something you had to think about. From exclusion criterias, if people had moderate or severe dementia, they weren't allowed, like we mentioned, if that MoCA is less than 18. If you had a physical disability, that precludes them from completing the exercise, or if they had some sort of dementia that was not Alzheimer's, that would also preclude them from this as well. And going on to continuing the methods here, how they select these people. Well, there were 51 total participants, 26 in the intervention group, 25 in the control, but they would eventually receive intervention. So what they pretty much said to them is, hey, are you willing to be in this study? And they say yay or nay. People obviously seeking out Dr. Ornish's group here are wanting to do lifestyle intervention. So nobody's gonna be no, I'm not gonna do anything. So what they did was they compared them for these 20 weeks, and then afterwards they gave them that program for free. Essentially, that was their sign-up bonus, if you'll say. And so there were previous studies showing that it's hard to keep people doing any intervention for more than 20 weeks. And so that's why they picked 20 weeks. And 2 dropped out in the overall intervention, so not too bad. And then they were once again reanalyzed at 20 weeks. And this was during COVID, so a lot of the stuff happened during the lockdown, and so they were on Zoom doing virtual things as well. From interventions perspective, the first thing first was diet, right? And the diet was a whole food plant-based diet, high in complex carbs. So there was fruits, veggies, whole grains, legumes, soy, nuts, seeds. Those are the big things, with 14 to 18% fat, 16 to 18% protein, and 63 to 68% of their calories coming from carbohydrates. The biggest thing to note here is that the calories were unrestricted, so they could eat whatever they wanted. So no control over if they're gaining weight, losing weight. Calories were unrestricted. The coolest thing was the meals were actually delivered. So every meal is delivered, which is obviously huge, and that's going to take a lot of resources. So that's why really cool for the study, but may not be the best for reproducibility. We'll talk about that later. They also took various supplements as well, things like omega-3 fatty acids and curcumin, multivitamins, CoQ10, vitamin C, vitamin B12, magnesium, L-threonate, lion's mane, and a probiotic. The reason they chose these things is they have multiple different mechanisms to why they may work. All these things have potential mechanistic data for like, oh, this could help mild cognitive impairment because of X, Y, and Z pathway. Very much kind of a stretch a little bit, but they're pretty much like throwing everything like, we'll just see. And that's kind of the whole idea of this thing is we'll just throw everything out there. So there's some mechanistic plausibilities, some of these supplements, and all of them, but not necessarily definitive evidence, if that makes sense. And they also have exercise. Exercise included walking at least 30 minutes per day and mild strength training 3 times per week. And they're also given a personalized fitness prescription, which is pretty sweet. I think it's awesome. And on top of that, they also had stress management techniques as well. So things like work through meditation, gentle yoga, stretching, progressive relaxation, breathing exercises, and imagery for that was an hour a day. And they also encouraged to get adequate sleep. And they also had a group support, which I think is really important. The participants in the study, the partners, they did do a group session for 1 hour per session 3 times a week. We'll kind of talk about the overall stuff, what's going on. But overall, these sessions, they had 4 hours sessions. So like 4-hour long sessions on Zoom. So 3 times a week. So 3 times a week, we're getting these 1 hour of supervised aerobic and strength training, 1 hour of stress management, 1 hour of this support group. So kind of talking with people, and then 1 hour on a lecture on lifestyle changes. So overall, the main outcomes are these cognitive tests, and the secondary outcomes are kind of biomarkers and stuff. So let's dive into the results now. Here are the results. So first of all, at their baseline, they kind of did this thing, this alpha beta 42/40 ratio, which was less than 0.89, which supposedly is an indicator supporting Alzheimer's disease. So all they're saying is, hey, based off of this, this is giving more data that this is probably the correct diagnosis of Alzheimer's. That's what that indicated for. The baseline characteristics of all the people show no real differences in things like marital status, sex, living situation, cognitive tests, or ApoE status, which ApoE is a genetic risk factor for developing Alzheimer's disease, and those didn't have any significant difference. Primary outcome-wise, this is where the big takeaway is that the intervention group saw significant improvement in the CGIC, CDR-SB, and CDR Global, but not the AD cog test, which that was like alphabet super. They're like, what the heck does that mean? Those are all the stupid acronyms for the names. I mean, they're not stupid tests. They're very valuable, but it's very hard for just to stammer those out. But 3 out of the 4 tests, they saw improvement, and whereas in the control group, they all worsened. And here I'm going to kind of bring in a picture. This is showing the general trend, which if you look at the characteristics, you can see, on one side we have improvement, the other side we do not. If you look specifically on the intervention groups in the green dots here, so the green dot, you can see kind of initially we had the score, which was higher, which means worse on the right side, and then it goes down, so they're improving that score. And whereas the other control group on the left side here seems to have no improvement, and that's kind of like the general pattern. They have multiple of these ones in the study, but overall this is kind of how they showed to the change in their patterns here. And additional biomarkers, let's talk about those real quick, is they found a significant decrease in the alpha beta 42/40 ratio, this beta hydroxybutyrate, LDL cholesterol, insulin, and glycoprotein acetylation. And there was also a, quote, significant beneficial change in the microbiome in intervention group, whatever that means. Microbiome is still a very hot topic. We're learning lots and lots about that, but like beneficial change, I think what they're saying is in pretty much people who have a quote unquote healthy microbiome, this is starting to resemble that more closely. It's pretty nebulous there. I didn't have a good one. There's certain strains they look for, and that's what they looked at there. But I'm always skeptical when someone says anything about the microbiome, just because we just do not know enough yet about it. But we're learning. And this is essentially based on, once again, having more bacteria that indicated improvement in Alzheimer's disease in previous studies. So essentially people who had improvement in previous studies had this change in the microbiota. That's what they looked at. On top of that, they looked at adherence. So people who adhered more to this did better. Pretty not surprising. They found statistically significant correlations between degree of lifestyle change and the degree of change in 3 of those 4 measures, meaning that the more intense you were, the more you followed up, the more you stuck to the program, exercised, did all that stuff, the better results you have, which is pretty unsurprising. But all right, so now let's talk about our discussion. And overall, it seemed like this improved for people. There seemed to be 3 out of 4 measures. And in the 4th one, they kind of showed a slower progression for the 4th. But there was one outlier that they did exclude. And when they excluded that, there were significant improvements in all 4 of the cognitive tests. And then, as we mentioned before, there were some improvements in the biomarkers potentially as well. So overall, trended in the right direction that, like, hey, the lifestyle intervention did make positive changes. And also on top of that the more lifestyle changes that were made, the bigger the improvement. Least shocking news there. So next, I do want to talk about some limitations. And real quick, I want to mention that people love to talk about limitations, right? That's the biggest thing, like in these, videos or reviews, or people were like, let's talk about limitations, like how terrible it is. And it just becomes a rip session. And like, that is not my intention at all. Like anybody who's ever done research or been in the academic fields understand, like it takes a long time. Even if you're writing like a review article, it takes a long time to research. It takes exponentially longer to do this, to get randomized controlled trial, to get humans in there, to get the IRB involved. So like nothing but respect for people for doing this, because this is how science moves forward. I'm really like thankful for this data. It took a lot of work on them, so congrats to them. But that being said, for just academic purposes, we're also going to talk about limitations just so we can understand a little better. So first things first is patient size, right? Only 51 participants. That is what it is. There was no blinding as well, because how do you blind them, right? Like, when you're getting the intervention. I guess if they took a person and brought them to a room 3 times a week and they just sat there by themselves for 4 hours, that would be like the control. But I think the much more humane control is just not doing that intervention. And so you can't blind them, if you're involved. It is 20 weeks, which is not incredibly long, but as I mentioned, that's what they did previously. They had a reason, method to the madness, because they figured that's kind of like the general one in the previous studies for getting people to follow along and do that. Another thing is that, not all patients improved. So 7 people in the intervention group stayed the same. 7 actually worsened and 10 got better. So this isn't like a universal, everything worked and like everyone got better. So that's just worth mentioning. A lot of times we think as the aggregate, yes, on the aggregate, it seemed to improve. But like for 14 of these people, they didn't have improvement. And so that's just something to think about. Was it because of adherence? Maybe that the people who got better were the most adhering. It seemed to be the pattern there, but just understanding that wasn't all the same. And then the biggest thing to this is like, how applicable is this really? And at the end of the day, that's like the number one thing, right? Anytime you have a study, you say, hey, how does this apply to my patient population? And for the vast majority of people who have mild cognitive impairment or whatnot, like this is just not a reasonable thing. And that's not any knock on the study there at all. It's just, this can be hard. And they were there at a group, granted it was Zoom, for 3 times a week for 4 hours at a time. So 12 hours plus a week of this intervention is a lot of intervention, and it's multimodal too, which was great, but also like this is a lot to, have someone be able to do this. Also, their meals were delivered to them so that they ate that. That's like as easy as it gets. And it's going to be hard for, anyone in real life to eat the diet that they're talking about if they have to prepare themselves. One of the big skills that you lose with mild cognitive impairment is your ability to prepare food. And so there's lots of logistical things, but that's not what they're looking for here. If you kind of look at it, they're looking for like proof of concept. Like, hey, if we intensely go after lifestyle changes, can we improve these outcomes? That's what they're looking for. So I'm not ragging on it here, but just understanding this is not quite as applicable to the general population. And one thing I see they didn't really mention was weight loss. I didn't know if there was any weight loss or not. If patients had weight loss because their calories were decreased, did that have any improvement? Not necessarily sure, but overall, a super, super interesting one. But the big takeaway here is this is not what the media says, right? So media is saying like a whole food, plant-based diet or vegan diet reverses Alzheimer's. And as you can see, like, that's not even close to what they studied here. And they didn't say that in the study as well. And I'm going to give credit to them. They said intensive lifestyle changes, which is exactly what this was. It's intensive lifestyle changes. It's not just a vegan diet, but you will see people in the media saying a vegan diet shows this or does this for Alzheimer's. Like in no way, shape or form is that what they're studying here. The vegan diet or whole food plant-based diet was simply the diet of choice for this study. And I think it's pretty cool that it shows the power of lifestyle medicine, right? Like that's the big thing, big, huge power of lifestyle. Would these outcomes be the same if someone was on a Mediterranean diet, on a DASH diet, on some other diet, whole food diet that's not necessarily plant-based, omnivore, whatever? Would we have the same outcomes? Like I would argue you'd probably see very similar things, would be my guess. I don't think there's anything inherently magical about a whole food plant-based diet, but guess what they did? Lots of fiber, lots of veggies, lots of good things. And so obviously we're not going to tell from that, but this is once again not a positive trial for a whole food plant-based diet. This is a positive trial for the power of lifestyle is what it was. And so that's kind of what I was thinking about here. But I love it overall. Shows that there's a huge lifestyle changes can happen and can lead to improvements. And this is needed. We need to see that, hey, lifestyle sometimes happens. And this is kind of one of my biggest things is when talking to people, yes, small changes, any amount of change in the right direction is good. Momentum in the right direction is good always. But for me, one of the take-homes that I've seen when I see people really have success, and whether it's weight loss or anything like that, a lot of times they change their lifestyle completely. It becomes a new way of life for them. And that's essentially what they're saying here is, yeah, this is to exercise, to eat well, to de-stress, to sleep. Like that is a lifestyle change. And it's not just, they call it lifestyle for a reason. It becomes a lifestyle. It becomes something you do, someone you are. I'm a person who does this, not like, oh, I got to do these things. If you're begrudgingly doing these things, it's not your lifestyle. It's not going to get there. So the goal is to maybe, implement a couple of changes here or there to eventually overhaul lifestyle. But that's what we're going for. But overall, though, the outro-wise, I think I really applaud the people who did this study. It was a good study, really kind of thought-provoking, but I just wanted to talk about it because the way it's being portrayed in the media is not exactly what it showed. So, but this does conclude the podcast. Thanks so much for stopping by. I really appreciate it. If you found today's episode helpful, it'd mean the world if you either gave me a 5-star review in your podcast platform of choice, or if you share it with a friend who you think might enjoy it. And if you never want to miss a piece of content, consider signing up for a mailing list where I'll send out emails when I release content. And I promise you, I'll never spam you because I hate spam. But that's it for today. Now get off your phone, go be active, have a great rest of your day.